Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in February. So, if you are new here, the way this runs is I will talk through the worst books that I read in February right up until the best books. There was a DNF in February, so we'll have a salty start, but I did read 3 5-star books in Feb, which was amazing, so it will end on a very gushy note. Before we get into the books, I just want to recap on sort of my goals for the year. So my overarching goal is to read more books by non-UK, non-US authors than by UK, US authors. So this isn't going quite as well as I would like, and I feel like now that I'm 2 months into the year, I probably need to start paying it a little bit more attention. So in February, only 19% of the books I read were by non-UK, non-US authors. I read 1 book by a Sri Lankan author and 1 book by a French author. Everything else was British and American, so not great, though a lot of my reading was dictated by the BookTube prize in February, so that does have a role to play. It means that overall, to date, in 2023, 30% of what I've read is by non-UK, non-US authors. So I've got a way to go to get that above 50%. The other 2 things I'm doing this year that I just thought I'd update you on are, so for my 100 book bucket list, I have read 2 out of 10. One of those books will be in this wrap up. And then for my 2023 BookTube inspired TBR, I've only read 1 out of 12. So we're officially now behind on that goal, but I'm sure I can catch up. Sure. Anyway, onto the books. So we're going to start with the DNF, and I do feel somewhat guilty about this one because it was a buddy read. I was buddy reading this with Jack at Spread Bookjoy, Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, and Dia at Novel Idea. And we were reading Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. So this is an epic fantasy. It's a chunky old book. It's like 700 pages. And I did get over halfway. So I gave it a good shot. But ultimately, I don't need that much sex in my books, especially when it's not relevant to the plot. I can deal with a bit of sex if it's relevant, but it wasn't relevant. And I really don't need every single female character to have sex. It's like, oh, we've been introduced to a new female character. Maybe this one won't have sex. Oh, no, she did. So yeah, I also found the like the layout of it quite jarring. There were big info dumps in it where we go back to characters' childhoods, and I just didn't think it worked very well. I was very confused. Guy Gavriel Kay threw us into this world, and it was a bit information overload. It wasn't my jam. Apparently the ending was quite good, but I do not care enough to go back and read it. So that was a DNF. But, you know, I gave it a good 350, 400 pages. So, you know, I tried. The next book I would like to talk about, and we're going to 3-star now, so nothing else was awful, but the 3-star books are just sort of meh. And we have A City Inside by Tillie Walden. Tillie Walden has fast become my favourite graphic novelist, but this one just didn't really work for me. It's really short. It was fine, but to be honest, I read it a while ago and I couldn't even tell you what it was about now because it's so short and nothing really happened. About a girl who's sort of trying to understand herself a bit better, I think. It was fine, ultimately forgettable. Then we have My Man Jeeves by PG Wodehouse, and this was the book that I read from the 100 book bucket list. And this was fun. This was short stories. So My Man Jeeves is about a guy whose name I can't even remember, and his butler, effectively. And it's very sort of British, taking the piss out of Britishness, British aristocracy. But this was a series of short stories. Some involved Jeeves to a greater degree, some to a lesser degree. And also, I found this amusing, quite fun, easy to read. I actually audio bit this, so easy to listen to. Yeah, it was fun, but ultimately forgettable. I think this is the point with my 3 stars, that it didn't leave a lasting impression. Next up, I have another book that I buddy read, and that was Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro, which I read with the lovely Heather over at Reading with a Vengeance. So we're up to 3.5 stars now, and this was a nice book. This was multi-perspective, following a family after quite a horrific event, and the impact that event had on them and another family over the following decades. And I enjoyed a lot of this. It was really a character study of all these different characters. My biggest criticism of this is that there were too many points of view. So I felt like if Dani Shapiro had focused in on a couple of characters, it would have been a lot stronger. Particularly the little boy Waldo, who I really, really enjoyed reading about. I thought he was a really interesting character, but there just wasn't enough of him, and it just felt like there was quite a lot of stuff that wasn't super relevant. And yeah, it was fine. I did enjoy it to a degree, but it was too plotless for me, I think, is my ultimate thoughts on that one. Next up, we have another Tillie Walden graphic novel. We have I Love This Part, and I really enjoyed this one. This was about the relationship between 2 girls. They are from different backgrounds, and them sort of exploring whether it's possible for them to be together in the environment that they are in. And it was quite sad, but I thought it was quite true to reality. And yeah, ultimately, I really did enjoy this one. We're up to 4 stars now, so this got 4 stars. I would definitely recommend this one over A City Inside if you are thinking about picking up some Tillie Walden. Next up is Taken at the Flood by Agatha Christie. So I am doing this year an Agatha Christie challenge inspired by Alice and the Giant Bookshelf's list of top 12 Poirot novels, and this was 11th on her list. This was a lot of fun. With all Agatha Christie, I feel like I can't really go too much into premise, because part of the joy of Agatha Christie is experiencing it for yourself. And also, the murders don't often happen until quite far into the book, so I feel like I can't even tell you who was murdered. There was a murder, clearly. But one of the things that I am really enjoying about Agatha Christie, and we'll talk about it again a bit later because I have 2 Christies on my wrap up this month, is that there is more than one mystery to solve. So I find that quite fun to do. It means that you have a lot of moving parts, a lot of red herrings, a lot of, well, which crime was committed by who. So I really enjoyed that. Poirot is a fantastic character to read. So ultimately, yes, a success. I liked this book. I would recommend it as a solid Christie. Next, we have poetry. So this is the 2nd month in a row that poetry has appeared on my list. Who am I? And we have The Lost Spells by Robert McFarlane. I think the illustrator is Jackie Morris. And I saw this, I think, recommended by Gloria Z. Thompson. And it sounded quite interesting, sounded a bit different. And after having a positive experience with poetry in January, I thought, I'll give it a go. And it was delightful. So this is nature poetry. The illustrations in here are just absolutely stunning. And it really did add to the experience, I think, of reading these poems. And they were just lovely. So I just read maybe a couple a day. And I really, really enjoyed it. I highly recommend, if you're not into poetry, but you want to sort of find somewhere to start with it, then this is a good place. And I have also got out from the library Robert McFarlane's other book, The Lost Words, which I am planning to get to in March. Next up, we have Katherine Howard by Alison Weir. This is the 5th in the 6 Tudor Queens series. And me and Emily are doing a read-along of this whole series. So we are reading the last one in March and April, which is Catherine Parr. But I really enjoyed this. I thought Katherine Howard's story was really interesting. She was a very interesting character. Alison Weir portrayed her with a lot of shades of grey. And ultimately, I found this probably the most plotty, compelling of the 5 that we have read so far. So, yes, I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to getting to the next one. Emily and I did do a spoiler-filled discussion on this, which I will link below. So if you've read it and you want to hear some more in-depth thoughts, then you can head over there. But yes, I really enjoyed this one. So interested to see how Alison Weir finishes off the series. Next up was a bit of a shock for me because this book had taken so long for me to read. Literally about 3 months it took me to read because I wasn't compelled to pick it up. But The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. I actually really enjoyed this book in the end. I thought it was a really interesting look at Sri Lankan culture and the politics and the different political sects within Sri Lanka, which I found fascinating because it's not something I know a huge amount about. If you're unfamiliar, this is the story of Maali Almeida, who is dead. And, and as he enters the afterlife, he has 7 moons to sort of make peace with his death and tie up any loose ends. And he has some loose ends to tie up. He is a sort of a war photographer, so he's taken pictures of atrocities across Sri Lanka, and you sort of really get a sense of some of the horrific things that have happened over there, things that I wasn't familiar with. So yeah, it was really eye-opening from that perspective, and particularly the last third of the book I thought was really compelling, and I could hardly put it down at that point, but it did take me a while to get there. So this is one that will probably stick in my mind, and I'm glad I did finish it because I did consider DNF in it, but it was worth it in the end. And yeah, I would recommend. Next up, we have the other Agatha Christie of this wrap up, and that is The Death on the Nile. So this is probably one of her most, if not her most famous novel, or most famous Poirot novel, and it was so much fun. I didn't know anything about this going in. I've never seen an adaptation for it, so I didn't even know who got murdered. And I was like, well, I think that person's going to get murdered, but it might be that person. And yeah, so we start in England, but we move quite quickly over to Egypt, where a young couple are on honeymoon. The wife is quite rich and a prominent member of society back in England, and she has married someone who is sort of socially below her. And then we have all these characters who have a stake in her fortune and her inheritance, which, now that she is married, will go to her husband. So what Christie does really well here is just to build this cast of characters that she puts on a boat together, and you are questioning all of them because you have this background to them before the murder even occurs. So I think that is why she is such an icon in this space, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The next book I read was another buddy read. I read The Martian Chronicles with Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, and this is a set of short stories, but they are interconnected. Now, I have had positive experience with Ray Bradbury before. I read Fahrenheit 451 and very much enjoyed it a couple of years ago, but I wasn't sure if I would get on with this short story format. But I was happily surprised. So I really enjoyed the way that Bradbury linked all of these stories together. I think he did that masterfully. There were some stories that would really stand out, particularly the one where he referred back to Edgar Allan Poe, back to an Edgar Allan Poe story, The Rue on the Morgue. And I think it was also interesting to pick up, you could see bits in here from Fahrenheit 451, and I think Alice picked up bits from the other novels that she has read from Bradbury. So you can just see how his mind is like ticking along and how he pulls bits out of one story to put into another story. And it was just fascinating to read. And Bradbury really is a master of painting a picture in your mind, and beautiful language and just stunning writing. So yes, I really enjoyed this book, and I am excited to get to more Bradbury. Then we move to my 5-star books. So there are 3 of them. The first of which is a graphic novel, and that's Waves by Ingrid Chabbert, illustrated by Carol Morrill and translated by Edward Gauvin. So this is translated from the French, and The reason this got 5 stars is because it made me cry like a baby. I was like hysterically sobbing reading this book. Trigger warnings. So this is about a young couple who are struggling to conceive, and tragedy that occurs in that process. I'm not going to say any more, but if anything around that sounds triggering to you, I would recommend looking into it a bit more before you pick this up. But I thought it was so well done. It didn't pull its punches, but it was also sensitive in the way that it presented the issue. And I think it's so important for people to know that these stories can be told. I think the things that happen in this novel, in this graphic novel, are very often swept under the carpet. People don't talk about them. They are seen as taboo. And I can see what Chabbert was trying to do here in sort of bringing it to the front and showing what it was like for this couple in particular to go through that, and how they moved through that very difficult period in their lives. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's not one I would recommend for everyone, but if this is the sort of topic that you think you can cope with, then I would recommend picking it up, because I think it's a really important message. Next up, we have Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, which was the FOMO book club for January and February. We also did a full spoilery live discussion on this, so I'll leave that linked below for you. But this was so good. This was my first foray into Daphne du Maurier, and now I get it. I get why everyone raves about her as a writer. So in this, we follow a young girl who has to move to live with her aunt and uncle after the death of her mother, and she moves to this inn on the Cornish moors, and her uncle is not a very nice man, and she sort of discovers what his history is and what horrible things he is doing in the course of her stay at Jamaica Inn. But what really elevates this book is du Maurier's ability to create atmosphere and suspense in a novel, and it was so compelling. I couldn't put it down. There were some absolutely beautiful moments of writing in here, and yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. If you haven't read du Maurier before, I would quite happily recommend this as a starting place, because this is where I've started. And yeah, intrigued to see if I love all her other novels as much as I loved this one. And then my final book, my favourite book of February, was Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. I bloody read this with the lovely Kristen at Enter the Book, and it's so good. Kristen did finish it quite a long time before me, but I have now finished it and I loved it. So I understand now why everyone says Brandon Sanderson is the king of fantasy. This was epic. We have 3 main perspectives. Raoden, a prince who at the very beginning of the book contracts some sort of disease and is thrown into the city of Elantris with others who have this disease. And then we have Serene, who has come over to marry Prince Raoden, but he is no longer there when she arrives, and she gets herself very much embroiled in the politics of this country and trying to improve it and make it for the better. And then we have Hrathen, who is a priest trying to convert this country to his religion. So that's the sort of basic premise. So we have lots of religious and political intrigue going on. And on top of that, Sanderson creates these fantastic characters that you are rooting for from page 1. I was delighted to see that as a male fantasy author, this wasn't full of gratuitous sex and discussions on females' nipples, unlike Tigana. And so he presented Serene as a very strong, independent woman who really took charge of her situation, and I was there for it. So yeah, if you are newer to fantasy, I think this is actually quite a nice starting point. This is a standalone, and I think it's a very compelling story. So would highly recommend this to anyone, whether you are a fantasy reader or not. And that is it. That is not quite it. So I did read some other books in February, but they were for the BookTube prize, so I can't talk about them yet. I will be doing a wrap up of my BookTube prize books at the beginning of April, but I did finish Vagabonds by Agatha Sunday, and I finished My Name's Lucy Barton, O. William, and Lucy by the Sea by Elizabeth Strout. So technically I could talk about the first two of those because they were in my group, but I think if I talk about those, you're going to be able to extrapolate to my thoughts on Lucy by the Sea. So I will talk about the whole series at the beginning of April. So yes, overall 16 books read in February, 1 DNF'd. Not a bad effort for the shortest month of the year, I think. So yes, what were your favourite books of the year, of the month? Let me know below. If you're interested in seeing the more in-depth discussions on Jamaica Inn or Katherine Howard, I will leave both of those videos here, and I will see you very soon with another one. Bye guys.